so many generations of enslaved people fought against slavery, and they kept pushing for a better tomorrow. And so many of those generations never saw freedom. They lived their entire lives enslaved, and their kids lived their entire lives enslaved, and their kids lived their entire lives enslaved. But they never stopped fighting for a better time. And eventually, their descendants were not enslaved. And so I oftentimes think about those types of stories. Does it absolutely suck that we live at a time what's happening is happening? 100%, right? But I also firmly believe we can't give up. We have to run our leg of the relay race. We have the baton right now. We have to run. We have to keep going. And then we have to pass it on to whoever's after us. And they have to keep going. And I want to say, hopefully we'll be out of this, hopefully in our lifetime, but we might not. But our job is to keep moving in the right direction.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today, our guest is Nebraska State Senator John Fredrickson. He was first elected to the Nebraska legislature in 2022, where he represents part of Omaha. He was elected by a margin of only 82 votes. He's the first openly gay man to be elected to the Nebraska State Legislature. We discuss Nebraska's unicameral, non-partisan legislature and the fact that the senators are term limited. We also talk about John's youth, how he and his husband adopted their son, and his journey into politics. This is part of a series on the podcast of the first gay men elected to state legislators around the country. You can also listen to our previous episode with Glenn Maxey, the first gay man elected to the Texas legislature. There's a link in the show notes. And upcoming episodes will feature the first gay man elected to the South Dakota legislature and the first gay man elected to Iowa state legislature. This conversation took place at the Council of State Governments Conference in Chicago in December 2025. John Fredrickson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us about your early life. Where'd you grow up?
Where did I grow up? So I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. So I don't know if I can claim Des Moines as home because I only lived there until I was 2 years old. But then I moved to Omaha, Nebraska with my family. And Omaha has always been what I would consider home.
What did your parents do?
What did my parents do? My dad, he's a businessman, so he still is. He has a company that he started in Omaha, but he was working different business jobs throughout my childhood. My mom stayed home, but she also would work part-time. She was like a jack of all trades. She had so many different career stories, jobs. She was always a problem solver, and I think I learned a lot from her on sort of getting creative and pivoting. And so she had a bunch of different jobs.
Were they political people?
They were not. Were they political people? Who's not political, I guess. It's
lots of people. I know lots of people who don't pay attention to politics at all and have no opinion.
Yeah, I guess that's fairly true. I would say they weren't political people in the traditional sense of involved in politics. I didn't come from a political family, but they voted. They voted, right? They participated in elections. Politics was a part of conversation growing up, certainly around elections especially. We would talk as a family about different platforms. And it's so funny because I'm 38 years old. I don't consider myself that old, but it feels like that was a lifetime ago in terms of what we were talking about.
Were they Democrats?
So it's a funny story. No. So my dad came from a family of Republicans. So my dad was a registered Republican, and then he actually recently registered as an independent or nonpartisan. And my mom came from a family of Democrats, and she was a registered Republican and then later a registered Democrat in her life.
Interesting. So she grew up with Democrats, but she was a registered Republican, to rebel against her family?
I don't want to speak for her. I don't know. I think that, it's so interesting because back then it was so different too, right? I feel like right now, party labels have such strong sort of connotations of what that means. I feel like both of my parents had registrations, but they were really middle of the road people, right? They weren't really extremists. In other words, there was, I would say kind of more of moderate perspective. So there were some issues where they fell left of center. There were other issues that they were maybe a little right of center, but there was never this feeling of, oh, we are Republicans or, oh, we are Democrats. It felt very issue specific, where they landed on things. And that's very common in Nebraska, I'll say that.
Did you pay attention to politics?
I would say that I paid attention to politics about as much as someone would as a high school kid, right? I think I got more interested in politics when I went to college, frankly. That's when I was of voting age, so I was able to participate in my first elections.
Do you remember your first election that you
I
voted
do.
in?
I do. It was the 2008 presidential election. So when then Senator Barack Obama was on the ballots. Yeah.
So did you vote for Obama?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. And that was awesome. That was a really exciting night. I went to undergrad at NYU, so I was living in New York at the time, and I still have like visceral memories of that election day and also that night, because obviously when President Obama was declared the winner, it was just incredibly celebratory in the city. And a bunch of us from our dorm went out to Union Square, and it was a party.
What did you study at NYU?
I studied social work. So I was a social work major. I had a minor in psychology and Africana studies. So I think I declared the Africana studies minor. I studied abroad in Ghana in West Africa when I was a sophomore.
How did you get involved in Africana studies?
Just studying abroad in Ghana.
So you studied abroad in Ghana. How did you end up studying abroad in Ghana?
NYU actually has a campus there. They have a number of different campuses, and Ghana is one of them. And it was actually a fairly new program when I applied to study over there. I studied there in spring of 2007. And it was interesting because I grew up in Nebraska, and then I went to NYU for undergrad. And I'd never been abroad in my life at that point. That was my first international trip.
So your first international trip was to Africa?
Yes.
That's an unusual story.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say, like, it was transformative. It's one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. I feel so fortunate to have been able to study there. Made incredible friends who I still keep in touch with and who live, obviously, in different parts of the world. And yeah, it's just a really incredible experience. I think having my first experience out of the country be in an environment that was very different than what I had grown up in was really, it can be so, in my opinion, like so helpful from like a building perspective. So it was incredible.
Hey, bouncing back to growing up in Omaha.
Yeah.
I feel like every kid, like their childhood is their childhood, so it seems normal. But were you suburbs of Omaha? Was it a like picket fence, like little subdivision type? Or
paint the picture of Omaha.
Yeah. What's growing up in Omaha like?
Yeah, it really varies depending on where in the city you grew up, right? So I grew up in West Omaha, which is certainly a more suburban part of the city and part of Omaha. What's growing up in Omaha like? It's kind of like a classic Midwest city. And I don't know if that means anything to you being from Alaska, but honestly, I think Omaha punches above its weight. I will flex on Omaha whenever I can. It's an incredible city. There's a really good music scene. There's a really good art scene. There's a really good food scene. There's a lot that Omaha offers it's a really great place to grow up.
What's the population?
Oh gosh, I think currently like it's around 700,000. I think like the greater Omaha area could probably get up to 1 million, but I think technically it's around 700,000.
Okay, so it's more than our entire state.
How much?
We have 760,000
in the whole state. Wow. How big is Anchorage?
300,000. 260 officially.
So that's a huge part of your entire state's population is that one city.
Correct, about half at the greater Anchorage area.
Yeah, yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah. Going to live in New York City and then going to do this part abroad, have you looked back on your time? Did it make you see Omaha differently?
Oh, yeah. I went to college when I was 18, and then I studied abroad when I was 19. I turned 20 when I was in Ghana. And so I think just at that point as well, like developmentally, you're figuring both yourself out, but also I think your worldview really is being developed as well.
I'm guessing that Nebraska didn't vote for Obama.
Interestingly enough, so Nebraska is one of 2 states that splits their electoral college votes. So Omaha did go for Obama, actually. The state of Nebraska went for,
McCain. Y'all split your electoral vote. So
we do
between Omaha and the rest of the state?
No, so it's by congressional district. So Nebraska has 3 congressional districts, CD1, CD2, and CD3. And the way it works is that the winner of each congressional district gets, so what typically happens is CD2, where Omaha is, it's typically called the blue dot, but I actually call it, I think it's a purple dot. It goes both ways. Historically, the electoral vote from Omaha has gone both to Republicans and Democrats. So the winner of each congressional district, the vote goes there, and the remaining 2 go to whoever won the popular vote statewide.
So you graduated with a degree in social work?
I did, yes.
And then what did you do?
I then went to grad school. So I studied social work both as an undergrad and grad student. So I went to grad school, got my master's in social work right after I got my bachelor's degree. And then I started working. So I started working at a federally qualified health center out in New York.
And did you go to grad school in New York?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. So I went to Columbia for grad school. And yeah, I was very fortunate, actually. I got hired at a FQHC called Callan Lord Community Health Center. The population it serves is the LGBTQ community. And I was really fortunate because one of my internships when I was a grad student, one of my clinical supervisor was at the time the director of mental health at Callan Lord. And she actually took a little bit of a risk in hiring me as a clinician because I was so new, right? I was a young clinician. I had just graduated, but she hired me to be one of the providers in the mental health clinic at Callan Lord. And I ended up working at Callan Lord for, I want to say, maybe 4 years, I think. And that was another incredible experience to work with a very diverse range of patients. And I think being a psychotherapist it's such a incredible privilege to do that because people really share themselves with you. And you had the opportunity to develop relationships with patients and walk with them through their various challenges and struggles. And I think it really gives you a sense of like where people are at. I always say social workers and teachers, I think, have a real sort of finger on the pulse of like where society is because they see so much and they hear a lot of people's stories.
Do you have any story from them that like has stayed with you?
Oh God, so many. Yeah. I always hesitate to talk about patient work because of like confidentiality and all those things. But there are patients I think about every day. And I think about this a lot when I'm legislating too. It's one of those things where...
What did you see? What would be different there you would have seen there that you wouldn't have seen in Omaha?
That's a good question. I actually would argue that there isn't much difference that you would see there than you would see in Omaha. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it is that here I was in New York City working with the primarily LGBTQ community. And on the surface, I might feel, oh, this is so different than Omaha, Nebraska. But what you really learn is that people worry about the same things. People struggle with the same things. It doesn't matter where they're living or how they identify. It's the challenges that people face and what keeps them up at night is pretty similar. Now, don't get me wrong, context is incredibly important. There's different barriers or challenges that different people experience, whether that's based on race, gender, whatever it might be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of people's worries and challenges are more similar than we think. And I noticed that too. When I moved back to Omaha, obviously I was seeing patients there as well. And that really kind of underscored it.
Why did you move back to Omaha?
A number of reasons. So we moved back to Omaha. So my husband and I, we met in 2011.
Let's stop. When did you know you were gay?
When did I know I was gay? Oh my gosh. Okay. I came out in college. So I came out my sophomore year of college, junior year of college. So
that's when you knew you were gay?
Honestly, this is going to sound weird. I remember having a crush on a boy in kindergarten. I don't even know if I would know like crush is the right word for it. So I went to Catholic school, K through 12. And I think were you all taught that homosexuality was wrong? I don't explicitly necessarily remember being taught it's wrong, but I definitely remember like knowing it was quote unquote wrong. And take that as you will. I think that's whether that was like a direct teaching or whether it was just like how it was implied or like how queer people were talked about. I also grew up at a time where there wasn't a ton of queer visibility, right? I mean, today we kind of forget like, having TV shows like, as simple like Modern Family or like, the queer representation, for example, is drastically increased from when I was growing up. And I didn't really have any queer role models in the community I was growing up in.
I wondered about that. On the one hand, like you talked about how what you saw at the LGBTQ clinic in New York City was not different than what you would have seen in Omaha. But I wondered if being gay in a suburb of Omaha as a young person would be a different experience than being gay as a young person in New York City.
I would say absolutely. My first time ever in New York I was in high school. My dad took my sister and I out there he had a business trip and he brought the two of us along with him. And I will never forget, it was the first time in my life, like I really remember seeing so many queer people like just living their lives like
with your dad.
Yeah. He actually, it's so funny. He took us to the show Rent on Broadway, and that's such a good show. Still to this day is like one of my favorite musicals because it was like my first ever Broadway experience. And for those who don't know, Rent's about the East Village and grappling with HIV and evictions and homelessness. And it's just like it's a very good story, but also a very queer affirming story. And that trip was incredibly transformational because it showed me a world where queer people were existing and thriving and very integrated in society. Now, queer people are everywhere. So obviously there's queer people in Nebraska, but there was not necessarily that level of visibility.
I'm like leading and pushing, but
Yeah.
but you didn't feel comfortable coming out in high school.
No.
In Omaha.
And I honestly, Andrew, I think I repressed it quite a bit. Like I have memory of, gosh, this is so, it feels cringe now, but like going to a Catholic school, like I have memory of like praying, like, oh, I hope that I'm not gay, or like, please, like, help this not be the case. And it's like sad for me to think about that because there was this.
I think we all did that. I grew up in a kind of religious household, and I prayed and prayed.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
something flipped in me, and this is not most people's experience, but
yeah.
I remember I went to bed one night and I prayed that I wouldn't feel this way. I was probably about 15, and I was having a lot of feelings.
Oh yeah, it's a big time.
And I woke up and I was like, I'll just see. And if I wake up tomorrow morning and I feel differently, then I'll know. And I woke up the next morning and felt the same way. And I was like, yeah, I don't think this religious thing.
Wow.
So for me, I was like, this religion thing's not really working.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, okay, I just have to figure this out on my own.
Yeah. But it was that decisive for you.
It was I really felt like a switch flipped, and I was like, and so for me, I completely turned my back on religion because of that experience at 15. It was like, this is not working. This is not working.
Wow. Yeah. So my experience was, I guess, a little different in the sense that I think I pushed it down a lot. I think I repressed it so much. And that I think there was a period of time where I think through high school, I was convinced I wasn't gay.
Did you date girls?
I did date girls. Yes. I had a couple of girlfriends throughout high school, and even my freshman year of college, I dated some women. And yeah, I mean, it was like one of those things where I don't know. First of all, I think sexuality is really complicated. I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I still am in touch with some of my ex-girlfriends, and they're incredible people. I repressed it enough that I didn't believe that I was gay. And then I think going to college and being away from home, and again, being in a city like New York, where it felt a lot more free. It felt like there was a lot more permission to, one, like better understand who I was, but it also felt safer to be who I was. And so I think there was a number of things that led up to it. It was so funny. I remember when I was going to come out to my family, I was going to come out over Thanksgiving break. I was going to be back in Omaha.
Your sophomore year?
Yes. And that's, of course, like you think about the holidays, there's all sorts of stress. Oh, this is a great time to come out to my family. But I remember, so I called my sister. So my sister we're 14 months apart. We're super close. She's my older sister. And she was in college as well at the time, but she was going to school in Nebraska. And I remember calling her, and I remember being like, I need to talk to you about something pretty serious, or I have something big to share with you. And it's so funny because her first response was like, oh my God, you got someone pregnant. Like, this is like, she said it was going to be like a pregnancy conversation. And it ended up being a coming out conversation. And she was obviously incredibly supportive and still is incredibly supportive. And then I was like, look, I want to come out to mom and dad. Like, when I'm back, I'm going to need your help with this and support with this. And of course, she was there for that whole conversation. And
And were your parents supportive?
They were. Yeah. Yeah. So my mom has since passed away, but my dad was very supportive, still is very incredibly supportive. And my mom I had the best mom in the world. She was, I think initially when I came out, she was a little surprised. And it's so funny because I'll never forget, like one of the first things she said was like, oh my God, am I ever going to have grandkids? And funnily enough, I ended up,
Did she live to see her?
Yes, she met Leon, her son. So I was able to give her a grandchild. But the thing that cracks me up about it was like my sister was like sitting right there too, right? So here my mom is saying, well, I'll never have grandkids. And of course, like my sister was like, well, what about me? And so my sister has 2 daughters and I have a son. And she lived obviously to meet all of her grandkids.
What happened to your mom?
She had cancer. So she is someone who we had the BRCA1 mutation in our family. So she
breast cancer.
Yeah, so she had breast cancer twice, super young, and then she ended up being in remission and fully cured from that. But then she ended up getting cholangiocarcinoma. She was, which is kind of that liver to get kind of area cancer, and so that's a difficult cancer. It's one that oftentimes is difficult to treat, and so she was diagnosed in, I want to say it was the fall of 2019, and she ended up passing away in my election year, actually, 2022. She passed away right before the primary in February of that year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I want to talk about your primary and I want to talk about running.
Yeah.
And that definitely gives some context. But you had said that you met your husband when you were in college.
In New York, after school though. So yeah, rewinding a little bit. So after graduate school, started working. And so my sister at this point had moved out to New York as well. So my senior year of college, she came out to visit for my birthday. My birthday's in March. And she had graduated at that point, and this was in 2008 or 2009. The recession was going on. Like, it was difficult to find jobs, and she was not really finding a lot of success back home. And I told her, I'm like, why don't you start applying for jobs out here? And so she started applying for jobs out there. I was an RA at one of the dorms there, and we had a blow-up mattress. She lived on the floor in my dorm room. And we ended up getting an apartment together, and so we lived together. And this is a very long-winded way if you want to get to how I met my husband. I promise I'm getting there. So my sister, she got a job at a startup, and one of her colleagues there, his name is Azim. He was one of Jeff's really good friends from college, both from Canada. And so Jeff had been transferred to New York from the Toronto office, and my sister and Azim put their minds together to set us up.
So Jeff, your husband, was from Canada, Toronto area?
Yes, he grew up outside of Toronto in Mississauga.
And then got transferred to New York City, and then you moved him to Omaha.
I moved into Nebraska. I got a Canadian in Nebraska, if you can believe that.
Yeah, I was just thinking like two big cities, like big city.
Yeah.
Omaha. Yeah. Although we've already discussed that by Alaska standards, Omaha is a very big city.
Sure.
But it seemed like how
drastic.
Did you do that?
Yeah, big change. Yeah. So we became parents in 2019. We adopted our son.
In New York?
In New York, yep. And when you become a parent...
You adopted at birth?
Leon he was 2 weeks old when we brought him home. And when you become a parent, that changes everything. We were both working full time, and it's a grind. Childcare is expensive. I think 90% of my salary was going towards childcare. And it was like, okay, we see our son before in the morning. Like, Jeff would have to get up and go to work before Leon even woke up. I would be there, the nanny would come, and I'd go to work. But then I would work and see patients late. So Jeff would be home, and there would be a lot of the nights where I wouldn't even see him before he went to bed. So we got to a point where, what are we doing? Is this something like, what's our long-term plan here? And so we started considering leaving New York at that point. And then my mom's diagnosis really was a big change as well. When she was diagnosed in 2019, that fall, that kind of accelerated our decision-making a little bit as well. So we decided we would move back to Omaha for a couple of reasons. One is that we wanted to be closer to family, and we wanted to raise Leon with that type of support, but also with my mom, knowing that her time was limited, we wanted to spend as much time with her as we could.
I want to pause really fast and talk about adopting Leon, just because I've had a lot of gay people on the show before, but I don't have any gay people who've adopted, even though my husband and I have adopted.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I'm just curious, if you don't mind me asking, about the decision-making process between you and your husband. Did y'all both always want kids, and this was so that you were going to figure out how to do it no matter what? Or in my case, I really wanted kids. My husband had never really considered it. And so I was like the driving factor. And that's actually been an issue in our relationship forever.
I know. You and I have talked about that.
I wanted kids. Yeah, I wanted kids. And then we got a kid, and then I'm in Chicago at a conference.
Yeah.
Always traveling.
Yeah. Yeah, being a legislator definitely changes dynamics a lot for those reasons. Yeah, so we both always wanted to be parents, right? We always wanted to have a kid. And
what does he do, by the way, Jeff?
Jeff, he works in finance and banking.
Okay.
Yeah. We always wanted to have kids. I think early on in our dating, and certainly early on, we didn't really discuss the logistics of that per se. It's funny, we always. Now that I'm thinking back to this, I don't know if we ever really even discussed surrogacy or any. I think it was just yeah, we're going to adopt. It was just this assumption almost, which might sound like a strange thing to say, but it felt like that just felt like the right thing to do in terms of that just felt like right for our families. Yeah, so through the adoption process. And that's, I don't know, you and I guess haven't really talked in detail about your adoption.
We adopted on a foster system.
Foster system, got it. How old was your son when you brought him?
He just turned 3.
Okay, yeah.
So a very different story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so Leon, he was 2 weeks old when we brought him home. And it was a long process. I think from initial application to placement, it was 3 years maybe. It was.
And was yours through foster system or?
No, we worked with an adoption agency. So it was a domestic adoption.
And I just have some curiosity questions if you don't mind.
No, please.
I know you can cut whatever, but did you when you go through an agency, did you request a boy? How much do you put on there of what you're interested in, what you're wanting? Yep. And does that change how long you end up having to wait
Sure.
I don't know. I guess, what does it look like?
So ours is it's an open adoption. So Leon's birth parents actually chose Jeff and I to be his parents, and we maintain a relationship with them. We email them every few months. We go out to New York at least once a year, and we see them once a year. There's always been an open relationship. In terms of the application process, we are always open. I'm sure there are people who do have specific sort of requests, like, oh, I want a boy, or I want to, but that wasn't our experience. We were open to.
So you had to, did you interview with multiple people having babies to see where you?
Yeah. Well, it's actually so funny. You create a little bit of a profile. And so it's, I like Jeff and I used to joke, it's like online dating on like steroids, because you're not like, you're putting a profile out there essentially to be chosen by a birth parent. And that's vulnerable. That's hard. Everyone has a different experience, obviously. But our experience was that we had a lot of near matches that ended up falling through. Now, whether that was because the birth parent decided to go another route or chose something else, which, I always, and our social workers to always say, you know what, like when the right one comes, it's like, all this will make sense. And I remember like at the time I wanted to be like, okay, fuck off. This is because it's like, it's so emotional.
So you had some ones that you thought were a go and then they weren't.
Yeah.
It must have been devastating.
Oh, it's like the worst. Yeah. But honestly, like as cliche as like I felt like that was at the time, like once I met Leon, and like now, like Leon's 6. And so now like, being I'm like, oh my God, of course, Leon is our son.
Right.
And I know that might sound like a little cheesy, but I couldn't imagine being a parent of anyone but Leon. It just clicked. Like he was meant to be. Yeah.
So you guys moved back to Omaha in 2019. Your mom had the diagnosis and Leon was a baby.
Yeah, he was like, he was just over a year old. Yeah, yeah.
And did you start doing clinical work right away? Did you go back to doing the same work?
So this is like going to sound weird to say this was a good time. The pandemic, right? So like remote work so 2020, it was like the year of like where everything changed. So Jeff and I were both able to like pretty seamlessly. And that was always a factor too, right? But pre-pandemic, remote work existed, but it was not nearly what it was today. And so that was one of the barriers of deciding to leave New York was like, okay, we have to line up jobs. We have to figure out what this is going to be. This sort of enabled that in a much more seamless way. Obviously, I had to make some adjustments. So my profession, I'm licensed, so I had to be like licensed with the state of Nebraska. And there's a number of things that we had to go through to make it work. But we had the good fortune of being able to work remotely for an extended period of time.
And I knew that you guys had to move back to Omaha. But did you have any discussion or talking about raising a kid in Nebraska with 2 dads?
We did, yeah. And we still talk about that now and then, right? We're a conspicuous family, right? A 2-dad family that stands out. That's not what's average. That's not what's typically seen in Nebraska. But I will also say Omaha is, our experience it's been incredibly accepting. Granted, it's worth saying we're 2 white men. We have privilege for a lot of reasons. It's not to say like everyone's experience is the same, but at the same time, yeah, we're absolutely a conspicuous family. And then of course, like I'm in the legislature, right? So that's like another layer of, I was gonna say, is conspicuousness a word? I don't know. Yeah, sure. We're gonna say it is. Yeah.
I'll tell you a really quick funny story about 2 dads. So when Waylon was about 5, Jay and I took him to a playground together, and there was another little boy playing on the playground who was there with his dad.
Okay.
And the 2 kids were playing on this big toy.
Yeah.
And the kid pointed at me and was like, "Is that your dad?" And Waylon said, "Yeah." And then the kid pointed to the other guy, to me and my husband.
The other guy, is that what you're calling your husband?
And Waylon was like, he was like, "Oh yeah, that's my other dad." And he was like, "You've got 2 dads?" And he said, "Yeah." And then he looked back at his dad and he was like, "He gets 2 dads?"
Oh my God.
Super, how unfair.
I love that.
Yeah, it was such a funny story. And the other guy like laughed.
Yeah.
But he was like, "He gets 2 dads?"
But those types of stories, I hear those types of stories all the time from queer parents, and it's like it's so true because kids are just pure. Kids are not like everything that we.
It's really different in junior high. I'll just say he for the first time ever he said that he didn't want the 2 of us to come to his open house night because and I was like, why? And he was like, having 2 dads is so embarrassing.
Oh,
not like in a hateful way.
No.
It was like, oh my God, just please don't do it because then that's what everyone's going to be talking about, and I don't want to
draw attention. Yeah, that's interesting too. And I guess at that age too, right? Peers are everything, right? So you don't want to stand out for any reason per se. Yeah.
Why did you run for office?
Why did I run for office? That's a great question. So again, my background's in social work. So this was never like on the bingo card. I didn't ever necessarily think that I was going to run for office, but there was a few things that kind of really led this to me. One is like, so when you work as a social worker, I was talking about this earlier, you get brought into people's lives and you learn so much. And one thing that I kept realizing was like the more and more patients I saw, more stories I heard, there are certain things that are obviously incredibly unique to the individual, but there are a lot of things that were universal in terms of policy or macro level things that were really impacting people's lives, regardless of what their situation was. And so social workers are trained to think about things both on the micro level, but also the macro level. So I've always in my clinical work have like had that like kind of thing turning in the back of my mind. What kind of policies are in place that are like resulting in this?
Was there a particular issue that was really the one that you thought about the most?
In terms like policy wise, I wouldn't necessarily pinpoint one specific issue. I can speak generally. Things that like really stood out were just like different like barriers to care or like hoops people have to jump through, just like procedural stuff that it just didn't quite make sense. And,
like barriers to care, like getting mental health care, like specifically to like
specifically mental health care. Yeah. And there's obviously barriers to medical, physical health care as well. But yeah, like mental health has just always been something that I think we could do so much better on in terms of providing access to care and availability of care and options for care for people. Honest to God, like the 2016 election was a huge eye opener, I think for certainly for me, but I think for a lot of people. And I remember I was like so angry and I was like, oh my God, I told Jeff one night, I was like, I'm gonna run for office. I've had enough. And
so you started thinking about it.
Yeah, but that also felt like kind of like a flash in the pan, like emotion mind type of thing. And time went on. But then when we moved back to Nebraska, I started paying a lot more attention to local politics. And obviously I grew up in Nebraska and so much of what impacts people's lives is what's happening locally here. Not to minimize the federal government's incredibly consequential and significant, but in communities, like the day-to-day stuff is really influenced on the local level. So actually, I reached out to a few legislators, state senators that were in the Omaha area that, and I was like, hey, can we grab a coffee? I'm considering running for office.
When we moved back to Anchorage in 2017, we got an apartment and then we bought a condo on the same street. I didn't think about what district I was in or where I was. Had you thought about like where you were going to buy or where you were going to be living in terms of how it would be what district you were in?
I did not. No, that's so funny you asked that. And I actually think about this a lot because we almost bought a house that was in a different district. It's actually in a district of one of my, so Senator Megan Hunt is a friend and colleague of mine, and it would have been in her district. And yeah, no, that one fell through and this house came to us. And the house we're in now, the district I represent, District 20, the member happened to be terming out. And so it was going to be an open seat as well. But that was like serendipitous, to be honest.
So it was an open seat, but it was an accident. And you had to spend $140,000 on your first election?
Oh gosh, I want to say it was like $186,000. I don't remember exactly what it was, but my opponent outspent me significantly. He spent like in the 300s.
And so you got to explain this to Alaskans and maybe to all of America. Okay. So you guys are a non-partisan legislature.
Yeah, we're the best.
What does that mean?
Oh my gosh.
Everyone's non-partisan.
No, we all have party registrations, right? When I say non-partisan, I don't necessarily mean it like in terms of we don't have Republicans or Democrats. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have partisans as well, or one non-partisan, I should say. But we from a structural perspective, so we are the only officially non-partisan unicameral legislature in the country. So we don't have a House and a Senate on the state level. We just have the legislature, which is the Senate. So there's 49 members of us, 49 of us. We're 49 state senators. And because we're nonpartisan, we don't caucus, right? So we don't have the traditional structure of majority. We elect leadership. The members themselves elect.
It's like caucus of the whole. That's what we would call it in Alaska.
Exactly. So it's all a blind ballot on the first day of session. We elect the chairs. So
blind. So it's anonymous ballot.
It's anonymous ballot, as well as for the speaker, who's the head of the legislature. So that's a blind ballot as well. Leadership is all elected by the members on a blind ballot.
But everybody knows everyone's party.
Yeah.
I talked to your colleague, who's the vice chair of judiciary.
Oh, yeah, Senator DeBoer. Yeah.
Yeah, DeBoer.
Because she's here.
Yeah, she's here. And
we're at a conference.
She ran for something.
Rules chair.
Yeah. And she gave like this impassioned speech where she said that she knew the rules backwards and forwards and that she was born for this role.
Which, by the way, she does. I mean, she's like one of the like experts of the rules.
And then the next guy stood up and he was like, if I ever have a question about rules, I'll just ask Senator DeBoer, vote for me. And then he won.
He did win, yes.
And she said it was, and that was like literally like his speech was like that short. And I was like, why did you lose? I was like, this is a Republican. So I mean, it's like you call it nonpartisan. But
yeah. So, and that's why I was trying to get at earlier. It was like, like we have registrations, right? And there is sort of, partisan policy that seeps.
How many Democrats serve in the Nebraska Senate?
So we have 49 members. Currently, we have 33 Republicans, 15 Democrats, and one like progressive independent. 16 of the more like
16 to 33.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does anyone in that 16 have a gavel? Do you guys get chairmanships? Okay.
Yeah, we have one Democrat chair of a committee. I'm a Democrat. I serve as the vice chair of Health and Human Services. Senator Bohr is a Democrat. She serves as vice chair of Judiciary. So we do have Democrats who hold some positions of leadership. And historically, to be frank with you, it used to be a lot more bipartisan. And what I mean when I say just like anywhere in the country, right? But we've seen in the Nebraska legislature, I was elected in 2022, and I think so my first session was 2023, which was a very challenging session for the body. And I think since then we've seen more and more partisanship. But I also feel like because we have term limits, we're constantly shifting as a body in terms of makeup, dynamics, and relationships. And I can sometimes have the fault of being like Pollyannish, not Pollyannish, but too optimistic. But I think things are getting better, and I think things will get better. And I don't mean that naively. I don't mean that to say my head's in the sand. I don't see what's going around. I think that there's a lot of really serious, grave issues that we're facing in terms of the health of our democracy. But I do have faith that people are. And I can only speak for Nebraska because that's where I'm from. That's my constituency. I do have faith that people are waking up, and I think we're going to come out of this.
So you were the first openly gay man elected to Nebraska.
I was.
Did that play a role in your race?
Did it play a role in my race? I've always been out. It was never a secret, right? My mail and my walk car, I could show my family. So it's like very clear that I have a husband. Actually, I take that back. There was one, I was going to say, fortunately, we didn't have a messy or dirty race that like felt like it was like anti-LGBT and stuff like that. But there was some stuff that went around like that, but not as bad as it could have been. Ironically, since I've been elected, we've seen more and more anti-LGBTQ types of bills and policies, not just in Nebraska, but nationwide, especially anti-trans legislation. So that's been really challenging. I'm up for re-election next year, 2026. And Jeff and I have had this conversation because our first race, like it didn't feel very vile. It didn't feel like it was very anti-LGBTQ. And I've actually wondered, I'm like, are we going to see a lot of that this time around, just given where we are as a country and where the dialogue has gone around the LGBTQ community? It seems like we've had a lot of progress in my lifetime, but at the same time, we're in a moment right now where there's a lot of vitriol towards the community.
So when I ran the first time, I had 3 opponents, and one of them sent out a letter contrasting himself with me, and he pointed out that one of the benefits to him is that he has biological children, that he didn't have to adopt children.
Wow.
But you know what? Like, honestly, he didn't say anything about me being gay. So in a way, it was like a weird thing. It's, I didn't have to adopt my children.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird.
But when people say stuff like that, honestly, this is going to sound weird, but I'm always like, thank you. Thank you for revealing who you are.
He did a weird thing, too, because he sent it to all my donors, most of whom did not live in my district. So it was such a waste of money. Those people can't even vote for me.
Yeah.
But he did send that to my mother, which is crazy.
How'd she respond?
She whatever, she doesn't care. Whatever.
Yeah.
But the hope I was going to give you is that when I ran the second time, because I'm every 2 years, I had one opponent, and all of his mailers were about me being opposed to the trans bills, which he used to say that I hated women. Like, it was very much, it doesn't want to protect women, et cetera, trans girls in sports. And I'm not kidding, it was exclusive. And our budgets were the same. We spent the same amount in the election.
Wow.
And
as an incumbent too, yeah.
Yeah. And he lost really bad. And I will say that I was really a little nervous. Like,
yeah, of course.
Like the night before, I was like, hey, did I misread this whole thing?
Totally.
Was this trans thing? Is that what's going to like flip my district?
Yeah.
And it was most definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I never did anything about him. I just continued to
focus on you.
My agenda and what I wanted to see, none of which, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but in Alaska, I have not carried any LGBTQ legislation. I have definitely stood up and spoken many times to stop bad things from happening, to support other people who are carrying LGBTQ legislation. But for me, I was like, I just didn't feel like that it needed to be me, that I needed to be the person who was going to push an agenda through with a Trumpian governor who's never going to sign any of it anyway. I'm just going to do my other stuff.
Right.
How have you navigated being the only one?
Yeah, look, it's however, so I'm not the only one. I was the first openly gay man elected, but so Senator Megan Hunt is bisexual, so she's queer. And then we have a new senator who came in after me, Senator Ashley Spivey, who's part of the community as well. That's nice. But I think that there is similar to you, if you would have told me my entire first session was going to be about the queer community, specifically transgender Nebraskans, their rights to exist in our state, I would have never believed you. I just would have never believed you. I didn't see that coming. But that was the entire topic of the first session. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my God. And I fought that hard, and I still fight those bills hard. Any type of anti-LGBTQ legislation, I'm going to fight hard. But I ran for the legislature to look at mental health and to bring my expertise in mental health to the body. And so a lot of my focus in the legislation I bring tends to be related to mental health. I also sit on transportation and telecom, so I bring a lot of those types of bills as well. But I'm never silent on issues that impact the community. It's just ironic because I think a lot of those bills are brought by folks who, especially the anti-LGBTQ bills, we have colleagues like, why are we always talking about this? Why are we always talking about stop bringing the bills? And it's not going to dominate all of our conversation. I mean, the majority of us in there want to actually govern. And I've kind of gotten in trouble for saying this before, but I actually think government should be kind of boring. I think campaigning should be exciting. We should give people hope, but like actual governing, like we should be in the weeds. We should be focusing on things that are actually going to improve people's lives. And a lot of these flash in the pan bills that we see, yeah, they might get you campaign donations, but these are not issues that the majority of constituencies are focused on at all. I knock doors all the time in my district, and Republican, Democrat, whoever, these are not winning issues in my district. They might have opinions about these things, but that's not how they're voting. They're not casting a vote for state government based on whether or not they think trans kids should have access to healthcare. I mean, they're voting on things that are,
that affect them.
Yeah, the economy, their workforce, they're talking about healthcare. All these are things that people have opinions on, but it's not the number one decision maker. And so I think that groups that do focus groups and polling and try to get people's emotions riled up on things, and then they run campaigns based on what upsets people the most. And I've always said that's cheap politics. It's very easy to villainize and dehumanize. It's very hard to come up with real solutions to improve people's lives.
Well, when I look at the federal government and the current administration and this sort of hatred for government in general, and I'm just making some big generalizations, appointing the least qualified people to do difficult jobs, because the point is, why not? We don't really care. We don't really want a Department of Education. Let's eliminate it all. Government is bad. Destroy it. And we have some of that in Alaska, folks who don't want things to work. And so for them, there's no harm in bringing up these sort of flash in the pan issues that kind of drive everybody crazy, because if they bring everything to a stop and nothing gets done, great.
Yeah.
Because they believe government is bad.
I'm pulling up a quote, and because I think this is hitting the nail on the head with what you're saying. It's a famous quote from John Boehner's memoir, who was the former Republican House Speaker.
U.S. House.
Yes, U.S. House. He said, what they're really interested in is chaos, wrote Boehner. They want to throw sand in the gears of the hated federal government until it fails and they finally prove that it's beyond saving.
100%.
And it's, if your entire identity in campaigning has been based on how ineffective or inefficient government is, it is in your best interest to make government inefficient and ineffective. But that's where our responsibility comes in, because that doesn't have to be the narrative. We can walk away from the delusion. Did you ever read The Giver growing up? Did you have to read that? Walking out of the forest, like making that decision, we can walk away from that delusion. Like government doesn't have to be bad.
So this is going to seem like a weird pivot, but I think about this right now, and I know we're at the end of our time. Walking away from the forest, to me, I think, you know what, I'd be so much happier if I walked away from social media.
Oh God, yeah.
And I'm asking you because you have a very active social media, huge following. So
it's the devil's playground.
And I think for me, I've gotten more social media traction in the last few months, and I feel like I have more of an audience. So I want to speak to the audience. And I've got that voice in my head being like, stay off of social media. And this other voice in my head being like, you're fine. You know, you got to be consistent, keep posting, like keep engaging. And speaking of mental health, not good for my mental health. Yeah. It's not good for me to surf Instagram at 11 p.m. when I should be going to sleep.
No. Yeah. Yeah, social media is like it's the devil's playground. It's so toxic, especially political social media. Like politics is so bad. I'm not perfect at it. My husband will tell you he'll be the first to say I need to get better at it. I think I've gotten a lot better at it than when I used to be. I work with a team with social media that help me, which is great. And that's part of this because I'm campaigning. I don't do that when I'm not campaigning, but I have a team that helps me with when I'm campaigning. And typically what I do is I will post, but then I post it, close it, and walk away. I'm not in the comments. I'm not reading all this stuff. I don't care. I mean, for my own mental health, that's not helpful. And so I'm also not going to silence myself in what I think society can be and what we can be because of some trolls on social media. I'm going to keep posting because I think it's important to tell stories and to share visions and to talk about, again, how government can actually be really good because there's so much out there that's saying it's going to be bad. People control all they want on those types of platforms, but for me, it's about putting your message out and walking away.
Okay, last question. You are running for re-election, and this will be your last term because you guys are term limited to 2 4-year terms.
Yes. So we can serve 2 consecutive terms. We can sit out and come back. So it's not a life ban, but there is a cap. Yeah.
And Alaska does not have term limits, but we're always talking about it.
Yes.
And I guess, can you speak to the benefit versus harm of having term limits?
Gosh, there's so many pros and cons to it. I will say this, Nebraska voters are likely going to be voting to extend our term limits. We have 8 years now, so 2 4-year terms. We're looking to possibly do that to 3, so 12 years. And part of the reason for that, one of the things that you don't always think about with term limits is that a few things. One is that I think it really increases toxicity in the body with term limits. And what I mean when I say that is that if you are coming into a legislative body where you need to work with your colleagues to do something for the state, pass a bill, it's in your best interest to form positive relationships with those people. What term limits have done is that it says, you know what, I only have to serve with this person for 2 years because they're termed out. It disincentivizes relationship building. And it disincentivizes, in some cases, being kind to that person. If you don't know how long you're going to serve with that person and say, look, I might be working with this person for 12 years, that's going to change how you interact with that person.
And you've seen that.
Oh, 100%.
Has anyone in the legislature ever been mean to you?
Mean to me? Define mean. I don't know. I talk to everyone in the legislature.
There was you don't have caucuses, but there was another caucus, and when we weren't quite organized, someone said they would never be in a caucus with a faggot, meaning me. And of course, got reported back to me immediately.
Of course.
And so something like that.
I've heard comments. Yeah, I've heard things under the breath. But for the most part, colleagues have been really good. There was one colleague when I first was elected who didn't want to shake my hand, but I ended up having a great relationship with that person. They're no longer in the body, and I still text with that person sometimes.
They didn't want to shake the hand with a gay person?
Who knows, right? That would be something I would have signed to. That was an assumption that you can make. That was never really explicitly said, but it exists. It can happen. Yes. I've had a lot of people tell me about things that colleagues have said during meetings they've had, or not necessarily explicitly about me, blatantly like pretty homophobic things. And it's not a surprise, right? It's naive to think that no one thinks this way or behaves this way. It's like I said earlier, I always say thank you for showing me who you are. It's helpful to know. One of my colleagues always talks about it's helpful to know who you labor with, like in who you're surrounded with.
So last thing, you read the John Boehner quote. Chaos is the goal, basically. And it seems like the current federal administration is achieving that goal. You also said that you're super Pollyannish and, sort of like try to see
optimistic, I'll say. I know I said Pollyannish. That wasn't the right word.
But I guess as some closing words, what would you say to folks who, like me, are very concerned about the state of our country and what's going to be happening? And we're not even to the year mark.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any parting wisdom that's going to be profound, but yeah, it's scary. I think it's very naive to say it's not. It's terrifying. I also oftentimes draw inspiration from history and from the past. And I was reading a novel a little while ago, and one of the aspects of it was talking about the slave trade and slavery. And it talked about how...
Do you remember the book?
Oh, gosh, I'll get it to you. But it talked about how so many generations of enslaved people fought against slavery, and they kept pushing for a better tomorrow. And so many of those generations never saw freedom. They lived their entire lives enslaved, and their kids lived their entire lives enslaved, and their kids lived their entire lives enslaved. But they never stopped fighting for a better time. And eventually, their descendants were not enslaved. And so I oftentimes think about those types of stories. Does it absolutely suck that we live at a time what's happening is happening? 100%, right? But I also firmly believe like we can't give up. Like we have to run our leg of the relay race. Like we have the baton right now. We have to run. We have to keep going. And then we have to pass it on to whoever's after us. And they have to keep going. And I want to say, like, hopefully we'll be out of this, hopefully in our lifetime, but we might not. And if we're not out of it in our lifetime, that doesn't mean it's not eventually going to get out of it, because we will eventually get out of it. But our job is to keep moving in the right direction.
Senator John Fredrickson, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-465-4940.